In the last winter of the Second World War, silence fell over the North Atlantic convoys, not from victory, but from something that refused to be spoken of. Between February and March of 1945, a classified Allied operation known only as Solaris vanished without distress calls or survivors, leaving behind a trail of redacted communiques and missing radio logs. Whispers among naval officers spoke of an experimental cargo too volatile to name, and of a storm that left no trace on meteorological records. Nearly 8 decades later, fragments of its truth still drift beneath the Barents Sea, waiting for someone to open what history has deliberately sealed shut. Chapter 1: The Vanishing Convoy of Operation Solaris. On February 12, 1945, under the perpetual grey skies of Liverpool, convoy HX-317 quietly assembled along the docks. Its manifest listed basic industrial supplies bound for Murmansk to support the Soviet front, machine parts, rubber and aviation fuel. But in the sealed holds of 3 merchant vessels, the SS Ardennes, the SS Mercer, and the Norwegian-flagged Fjordheim, were crates stenciled with the codename Solaris. Only 8 men on the entire convoy roster were aware of their presence. Officially, the operation was overseen by the British Admiralty's North Atlantic Command. Unofficially, it was directed from a nondescript office in Grosvenor Square, under the authority of Brigadier Sir Alistair G. Mallory, liaison to the American Manhattan Engineer District. The convoy departed at 23:45 under heavy escort. 2 Flower-class corvettes, HMS Thane and HMS Foxglove, and a single destroyer, HMS Zealous. Their orders were routine. Standard northern route, maintain radio silence. Weather reports promised mild conditions, but by the 15th, barometric readings plunged without warning. Ice winds hit faster than forecasts predicted. Zealous recorded a sudden electromagnetic disturbance at 03:12 hours. All magnetic compasses spun erratically for nearly 7 minutes. When bearings returned, Fjordheim was gone. The following morning, HMS Thane reported floating debris, oil drums, fragments of hull plating, but no lifeboats. At 09:00, Thane's sonar detected a faint signal, rhythmic, pulsing, repeating every 19 seconds. The captain, Lieutenant CMDR Arthur Nesbitt, noted it resembled a coded beacon rather than distress tones. Then the signal stopped mid-transmission. Nesbitt's final entry, later redacted from official logs, reads simply, "Transmission ceased abruptly. Air tastes of ozone. Crew uneasy." By February 18th, only HMS Foxglove reached Arkhangelsk. She arrived heavily iced, short on fuel, and with 1/3 of her crew suffering radiation-like burns across exposed skin. Soviet medical officers examining the men were forbidden to take samples. British command ordered their immediate evacuation to Scapa Flow. Within 48 hours, all were transferred to a US medical transport bound for New York under security code Aletheia 4. None of those sailors were ever reassigned to active duty, nor do their service numbers appear in post-war pension archives. For decades, the Admiralty maintained that HX-317 succumbed to severe weather and navigational failure. Yet among post-war intelligence papers declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, a single memorandum from Rear Admiral William J. Smith of US Naval Intelligence, dated May 1945, contains the phrase, "Solaris cargo compromised, site unrecoverable, containment protocol engaged per Churchill-Roosevelt directive." The document is stamped classified atomic research material, then struck through in red pencil. In 1973, an expedition by Norwegian divers near Novaya Zemlya, searching for wartime wrecks, discovered corroded steel fragments bearing the US Army Corps of Engineers emblem. Radiation levels measured 10 times above normal background. The divers' camera footage, later confiscated by Soviet authorities, showed what appeared to be sections of cylindrical casing lined with lead sheeting, an unusual design for cargo containers, even by wartime standards. Within a week, the entire dive operation was shut down by the KGB. Official reasoning: territorial breach. Unbeknownst to the divers, a classified CIA field cable from the same year, titled Operation Harrowlight, recorded renewed Soviet interest in Solaris wreckage retrieval. The cable referenced an intercepted radio message from Murmansk military headquarters requesting deep water salvage for Category Delta artifact. No such category existed in any NATO or Warsaw Pact. classification system. American analysts later speculated that the Soviets had retrieved at least one sealed canister from the seabed. What exactly those containers held remains unclear. However, declassified correspondence between General Leslie Groves of the Manhattan Project and Sir Alistair Mallory reveals discussions of a shipment of pre-critical uranium composites destined for forward evaluation. This aligns disturbingly with the timeline of Solaris. In simple terms, the convoy may have been transporting unstable nuclear material meant for Soviet testing, a desperate bid to sustain post-war cooperation before the inevitable fracture of trust between the Allies. By 1947, all documentation referencing Solaris had been transferred to a top-secret archive under the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission. A surviving clerk, Harold Wint, testified anonymously in 1961 that several crates from the lost convoy were later logged at a remote testing site in Nevada under the alias Meteorological Instruments. Wint's testimony vanished soon after. No record of his death or employment termination exists. Decades later, in the fading Cold War years, a classified Royal Navy study revisited the Barents anomalies. Using magnetometric sensors, they identified a metallic mass consistent with a Liberty-class hull approximately 200 nautical miles north of Murmansk, exactly where the Fjordheim's last coordinates were recorded. However, sonar imaging revealed an unnatural pattern along the seabed, almost as if the ship had been folded inward, its metal distorted beyond conventional implosion signatures. When a remote probe descended to investigate, the transmission feed cut abruptly. The last frame captured a faint glow emanating from the ocean floor. Following the failed probe mission, the area was declared environmentally restricted due to supposed contamination from a sunken Soviet reactor. Yet internal defense communications describe the restriction differently. Long-term containment zone, Project Solaris. Even now, survivors and descendants of HX-317 crewmen describe strange anomalies in naval archives. Logbooks have missing pages replaced with sheets of modern paper. Ship rosters are incomplete. Weather bulletins from February 1945 are rewritten in different typefaces. When questioned, naval historians admit that Solaris appears nowhere in official convoy registries, though its escort ships' movements confirm its existence indirectly, as one researcher from King's College London wrote in a suppressed dissertation. If Solaris never happened, then why were its survivors buried under false names? The last trace of Operation Solaris emerges in a 1989 MI6 memo to the Foreign Office, titled Declassification Request, Barents Naval Anomaly. The file was denied release under Section 3C, potential to compromise ongoing defense relationships. What relationships? No one could say. The memo concluded with one line, underlined twice. All records pertaining to Solaris remain under dual Anglo-American seal until 2045. No wrecks have ever been recovered. No official cause has ever been confirmed. Yet sailors still speak of a patch of sea near Novaya Zemlya, where compasses falter and sonar goes blind. A silent corridor where the water hums faintly, as though carrying the heartbeat of something still alive beneath it. Those who have navigated through it report the same strange odor described by Lieutenant Camdion Nesbitt in his final note. Ozone and metal, sharp and cold, lingering like a memory of lightning trapped underwater. Chapter 2: The Shadows Beneath Tempelhof Airfield. In the final days of the Reich, as Soviet shells rained over Berlin, a network of tunnels beneath Tempelhof Airfield pulsed with a different kind of urgency. Officially, these passages were storage depots and air raid shelters. Unofficially, according to post-war interrogations, they housed a classified program under the SS's Weapons Development Office, known by the codename Project Morgenrot, Project Red Dawn. The first mention appears in an intercepted message from March 23, 1945, decoded by British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park. Transfer Morgenrot units to Tiergarten facility. Secure modules under West Hangar. Initiate self-burial protocol. The term self-burial baffled analysts for decades. When Soviet troops entered Berlin in late April, Tempelhof became one of their earliest objectives. The airfield, symbol of Nazi aviation might, was expected to be a prize target. Red Army reconnaissance reported minimal resistance and a surprisingly intact infrastructure. but the first battalion to descend into the sub-basements vanished for nearly 2 hours. When they resurfaced, they were disoriented, unable to explain where they had been. Their commander, Colonel Sergei Taranov, described finding sealed concrete doors with electric locks and American markings. Soviet engineers blasted the doors open, only to discover empty halls lined with concrete pillars, the air thick with the smell of burnt metal. For years, those underground complexes were sealed and forgotten. But in 1949, the US Air Force took over Tempelhof during the occupation of Berlin. Within months, restricted areas appeared under the western runways. Maps show the addition of 2 ventilation shafts that did not connect to any above-ground facility, US Army Corps of Engineers. Blueprints labeled them maintenance corridors, yet the shafts descended over 60 meters into reinforced chambers. In 1952, Air Technical Intelligence Unit (ATIU) officers arrived under diplomatic cover, allegedly to investigate remnants of German aircraft prototypes. Among them was Dr. Everett Hollings, who had previously worked on captured V-2 technologies at White Sands. His personal notes, declassified in fragments after his death, mention non-aerodynamic structures inconsistent with conventional airframes, and evidence of rotational magnetism studies far beyond 1945 capabilities. By the 1960s, West Berlin's government requested access to the deeper sections of Tempelhof for urban planning. The US refused, citing containment of unexploded ordnance. German officials privately protested, noting that ordnance clearance had already been completed a decade earlier. In response, the Americans expanded their restricted perimeter. Contemporary aerial photographs show faint outlines of a circular excavation beneath the North Apron, later covered by concrete. No construction records exist for that phase. The most telling evidence came from East German engineers who defected after the Berlin Wall fell. In 1991, one former Stasi technician, identified only as Victor H., described being sent in 1964 to install electromagnetic sensors under Soviet supervision near Tempelhof's eastern fence line. His assignment was to monitor anomalous power fluctuations reported by Soviet embassy staff. According to his testimony, their equipment picked up rhythmic pulses deep beneath the airfield, brief surges at precise intervals every 22 seconds. It was as if something was still running down there, he said during a recorded interview. Not a generator, but something older. In 2002, during renovation of the airport's lower infrastructure, contractors discovered a welded steel plate embedded beneath the floor of a maintenance tunnel. The plate was engraved with an SS Eagle and the designation V-Kraft 9B. Archival research traced the symbol to the Waffenamt Prüfwesen, Germany's wartime weapons testing bureau. However, the V-Kraft label does not appear in any known wartime database. A subsequent GPR, ground-penetrating radar scan beneath that plate revealed a hollow cavity extending another 20 meters below. Within days, federal authorities halted the excavation, citing structural instability, and all documentation from the contractor's team disappeared from municipal records. In 2010, Berlin historian Dr. Renate Koenig uncovered fragments of a 1945 Luftwaffe memorandum archived under misfiled property records. The document, signed by Oberst Heinrich Voss, outlined a phase transfer study using rotational electromagnetic containment. Voss's name matches those referenced in American ATIU briefings from the 1950s, though under the alias Dr. H. Voss, Consultant, Aerospace Propulsion. No birth record or academic credential survives. A FOIA request filed in 2018 revealed that an individual with that name worked intermittently for Rand Corporation between 1956 and 1961, attached to classified propulsion projects linked to nuclear-powered aircraft research. His employment file was sealed for reasons of national security. In 1962, a Rand briefing to the US Air Force, document R2184PR, included a cryptic sentence: recovery of Morgenrot components successful, further replication infeasible due to material degradation. When the report was finally declassified in 1999, those words had been manually blacked out. Researchers only discovered them after ultraviolet restoration of the original microfilm. Morgenrot had been struck from official history, but it lingered like an infection beneath the surface of Berlin. Further, investigation revealed that several components, supposedly lost from Nazi research inventories, reappeared. in early American aerospace patents. A specific alloy composition, labeled duralumin type 57B, identical to one referenced in the Morgenrot memo, later became central to advanced jet turbine blade designs in the early Cold War. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the timeline aligns too neatly. The Germans may have been closer to breakthroughs than the Allies wanted the world to believe. What truly lies beneath Tempelhof remains speculative, but repeated electromagnetic anomalies persist. Between 1994 and 2007, Berlin's air traffic control reported recurring interference on civilian radio bands localized directly above the airfield. Even after its closure in 2008, residents in nearby Schöneberg continued to describe hearing a faint, low hum during calm nights, vibrations felt rather than heard, emerging from the ground. Today, most of the tunnels remain sealed by reinforced concrete. Official tours for visitors carefully avoid lower levels. City planners claim maps of the substructure were misplaced during archival digitization. The few that survive stop abruptly at the 3 level, as if someone deliberately removed any trace of deeper passages. In 2015, a leaked construction permit suggested that part of the underground section had been reclassified as a strategic communications reserve, a bureaucratic euphemism, whose meaning remains unclear. Tempelhof stands now as a public park, its runways repurposed for recreation. Children play above the ground where, 80 years earlier, scientists and soldiers hid something their superiors considered too dangerous to destroy. Beneath that calm surface of grass and concrete, the tunnels of Project Morgenrot remain sealed, waiting. Some Berliners whisper that during winter, when the snow muffles the world, you can still feel a faint tremor rising through the earth. Steady, mechanical, pulsing every 22 seconds, like a machine refusing to die. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Black Orchestra Files. Amid the crumbling Reich of 1944, when defeat had already begun its slow crawl through the bones of Berlin, a quiet resistance took shape inside the German intelligence service itself. It was not a rebellion of soldiers or citizens, but of officers, linguists, and analysts who believed that Hitler's Germany had become something unspeakable. They called themselves Die Schwarze Kapelle, the Black Orchestra, a network within the Abwehr devoted to ending the war from within. Officially, they were dismantled after the failed July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. Unofficially, they survived, shifting their focus from political overthrow to concealment, the destruction of evidence and relocation of scientists tied to the Reich's biological and chemical weapons programs. The name first appeared in an OSS field dispatch dated November 5th, 1944. Abwehr elements pursuing independent surrender. Negotiations under codename Paperfold. Possible overlap with Schwarze Kapelle cell. The report was marked ultra-secret and forwarded to London, where MI6's Section 5 interpreted it as an internal German power struggle. What the Allies didn't understand was that these officers weren't seeking redemption. They were burying something. Captured Wehrmacht archives from 1945 mention a classified operation within the Abwehr's technical branch titled Erntewerk, or Harvest Factory. Located near the village of Tutzing on Lake Starnberg, Bavaria, it was supposedly dismantling evidence from the SS's Unit 12, a biomedical detachment attached to the Oranienburg concentration camp complex. Testimony from an SS adjutant taken at Nuremberg mentions sealed glass, cylinders labeled with strange numerical codes being transported by rail to southern Germany in March 1945. Those cylinders vanished along with the men guarding them. In 1946, an American intelligence officer, Captain Harold Green, stationed in Munich, wrote a memorandum describing an encounter with a captured Abwehr agent named Otto Weiss. Weiss claimed to have been a courier for a Dr. Martin Reichel, an epidemiologist tasked with moving materials for the Black Orchestra to neutral Switzerland. The materials, Weiss said, were intended as leverage for surrender. We had to give them something the Allies couldn't refuse, he told Green. A sample, not a weapon. Green's report, filed under Project Paperfold, disappeared from OSS archives by 1948. Only a carbon copy survived in British intelligence records, recovered decades later in Kew. According to surviving notes, Reichel's convoy left from Innsbruck under the escort of the 23rd Mountain Infantry Battalion. 2 trucks reached Zurich. The third, carrying the sealed canisters, never crossed the Austrian border. Its last known position was near Feldkirch, where Allied aerial reconnaissance recorded a convoy destroyed by strafing. Yet subsequent ground inspections found no wreckage, no bodies, no vehicles, not even tire tracks. In 1951, the CIA conducted a classified review of retained assets under a new project titled Blue Haven. The purpose, to identify German scientific personnel useful for Cold War research. Within its annexes lies a single page, page 412, referring to back manuscripts. Analysts believe this was a code for Black Orchestra documents. The entry notes: materials retained, contagion vectors unstable, stored under Section 17, location undisclosed. Section 17 corresponded to Fort Detrick, Maryland, the center of US biological warfare research. But when congressional investigators later examined Fort Detrick's historical inventory, no such material appeared. Fragments of the Black Orchestra resurfaced in an unexpected place: the intercepted radio logs of the German submarine U-234, captured by the US Navy in May 1945. Officially, the sub was carrying uranium oxide to Japan. Unofficially, one line of decoded traffic, labeled Supplemental Manifest, mentions Courier Reichel, sealed archive in Case 7B. The manifest Case 7B was never logged in the US Navy's final report. When asked about the discrepancy, Admiral Chester Nimitz reportedly dismissed it as clerical error. Yet the same notation appears in a private memo by Colonel Charles Mantz, OSS liaison. One case unaccounted for, contents under diplomatic seal. Destination: Washington, D.C. The trail picks up again in 1957, when a Senate Oversight Committee investigating Project Paperclip requested a list of all transferred German scientists. A heavily redacted appendix lists an M. Reichel as missing presumed deceased. 2 years later, RAND Corporation documents reference a consultant R7 with expertise in immunological weaponization, employed under contract to the US Air Force's Biological Research Division. The correlation between R7 and Reichel was later confirmed through payroll codes, but his identity was erased from public record. Former intelligence officers who handled the Black Orchestra files described them as the most sensitive material of the post-war period. They contain not only evidence of Nazi experimentation, but also correspondence between Abwehr officers and Allied intermediaries, proof of secret communications that predated Germany's surrender. One 1945 message sent via Swiss diplomatic channels, decrypted in 1978, includes a chilling line: "We have secured the contagion. Deliver to your doctors before they deliver judgment." Historians who reviewed the decrypted text in the 1990s speculated that the Black Orchestra's goal was to ensure Germany's survival as a scientific power under any victor. By controlling the transfer of bioweapon knowledge, they positioned themselves as indispensable to whoever won the war. What they didn't anticipate was how quickly their efforts would be absorbed and erased by their supposed rescuers. When the Cold War deepened, the legacy of the Black Orchestra became buried beneath a web of new projects. Fort Detrick's early viral studies, the CIA's covert operations in Asia, and Soviet counter-programs in Novosibirsk all share a peculiar technical overlap with Abwehr-era terminology: mutagenic carriers, vector drift, wet delivery. None of these terms appeared in American or Soviet documentation before 1945. Yet suddenly, by 1948, they became standard language in both sides' programs. Declassified British intercepts from the early 1950s add one last haunting clue. An MI6 agent stationed in Geneva intercepted a transmission believed to originate from an abandoned Swiss safehouse once used by Abwehr operatives. The signal consisted of a series of slow Morse bursts, repeated twice nightly for nearly a week. The decoded message read, "Capella remains unbroken. The files live." When a team was sent to investigate, the safehouse had already been burned to its foundations. Only a melted brass nameplate was recovered, stamped M. Reichel, physician. Some historians dismiss the Black Orchestra as myth, a melodramatic embellishment of the real Abwehr resistance. But internal NATO memoranda tell a different story. In 1964, a restricted briefing to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe stated, "Intelligence review indicates possible recovery of pre-war contagion samples. Source: Allied containment. Original provenance: Abwehr, Section the 3rd C." That memo remains one of the few official acknowledgements that the files existed at all. By 1972, whatever remained of the Black Orchestra's materials had been quietly transferred under the codename Eclipse Archive. Location classified. An internal Pentagon ledger listed its contents as biological samples, documents, and film reels, status indefinite containment. In 1995, an unmarked metal case found during renovation of a storage wing at Fort Detrick bore a faded label, 7B. Inside were only fragments of microfilm, too degraded to recover. The fate of the Black Orchestra and the men who tried to cleanse their nation by burying its sins remains unsolved. Whether they sought to redeem themselves or merely to survive, their legacy continues to ripple through the hidden corners of post-war science and intelligence. Somewhere in a sealed archive, perhaps under a new name, the last echoes of their files still hum faintly, like a warning from an age when the line between salvation and secrecy vanished inside the walls of a collapsing empire. Chapter 4. The Arctic Ghost Stations of Kola. Between 1952 and 1959, intelligence flights over the Soviet Arctic repeatedly reported anomalies along the Kola Peninsula, a desolate, frozen expanse of tundra east of Murmansk, where the aurora often danced like an electric curtain over the snow. The US Air Force called them heat ghosts. Small, inexplicable spikes of infrared energy pulsing from zones officially marked empty on Soviet maps. British naval reconnaissance labeled the phenomenon Project Frostline. The Soviets, as usual, said nothing. It was not until the fall of the Soviet Union that fragments of truth began to leak from former officers. References to hidden listening posts, forgotten installations, and something they called the Merdvaya set, the dead network. The earliest evidence came from declassified CIA satellite photographs dated 1954, showing faint rectangular shadows in the snow near Lake Imandra. Each appeared identical, rows of structures buried under ice, spaced at perfect intervals. Engineers reviewing the images concluded they resembled ventilation shafts. That winter, British intelligence decrypted a Soviet engineering dispatch referencing complex Vostok 3C and a reactor calibration failure. The coordinates matched one of the anomalies. Yet when American analysts overlaid the data on updated Soviet cartography, the region was erased. No lakes, no settlements, just a blank white void. It was not unusual for the Soviets to omit classified regions from public maps. What made this case unique was that by 1957, even military topographic charts stopped including the coordinates. They were not merely hidden, they were purged. In 1958, British Royal Air Force pilot Lieutenant Graham Hensley participated in a reconnaissance mission under Operation Cold Spine, an Anglo-American effort to monitor Soviet radar frequencies in the Arctic. Hensley's flight path crossed directly over the Imandra sector. At 0300 hours, his aircraft's instruments began to fail, altimeter spinning, radio static swelling. For 11 minutes, the plane's radar showed reflections as if multiple airborne objects were rising from below. When Hensley returned to Thule Air Base, technicians discovered the aircraft's fuselage bore traces of electromagnetic scorching, despite no lightning storms reported in the region. His debriefing report, filed under code C21958, ends abruptly with the line, "Recommend area be avoided until source of interference is confirmed." No further flights were authorized. In 1961, after the Soviet detonation of the Tsar bomber on Novaya Zemlya, Western analysts noted unusual signal traffic coming from the Kola Peninsula in the weeks prior. Intercepts recorded rhythmic UHF bursts transmitting at 12-hour intervals, identical in pattern to Hensley's 1958 flight anomalies. A British SIGINT summary referred to the transmission as the heartbeat of the ghost stations. One decrypted fragment included the word Imandra, followed by a 4-digit code, 1943. That year corresponded to an obscure wartime German document recovered by the Allies, describing Arctic relay tests for atmospheric communication. The implication was staggering. Soviets might have inherited or repurposed Nazi technology. By the early 1970s, both NATO and Warsaw Pact personnel stationed in the north reported similar phenomena: dead radio zones, sudden compass deviations, invisible interference on radar sweeps. Yet, Soviet engineers who defected later revealed that these anomalies were not malfunctions. They were deliberate. The installations beneath the Kola ice shelf, they said, were constructed on top of abandoned German research tunnels dating from 1943-44. During the war, A contingent of Wehrmacht engineers operating under Organization Todd had been stationed near Monchegorsk, ostensibly to build supply depots. In truth, they were laying foundations for a secret signal relay network intended to link occupied Norway to northern Russia. When the front collapsed, those tunnels were sealed and later rediscovered by the Red Army. The Soviets, intrigued by the advanced cabling and unfamiliar alloy components, reactivated the network during the early Cold War. They called it Systema Siva II, a long-range electronic warfare platform capable of jamming NATO radar across the polar region. According to surviving blueprints smuggled to Finland in 1993, each ghost station contained a reactor core powered by a hybrid coolant mixture of mercury and beryllium, an experimental design never reported in Soviet reactor inventories. The choice of materials suggested German origin. In 1982, a joint Finnish-Norwegian geological expedition attempted to reach the restricted Kola zones to collect mineral samples. Their route, documented in satellite telemetry, entered the Imandra corridor on February 4th. 72 hours later, radio contact ceased. A Soviet rescue team found only burnt snow, twisted sled frames, and melted instruments. Autopsies, what little was released, reported massive internal hemorrhaging, consistent with exposure to intense electromagnetic fields. Officially, the incident was labeled an avalanche. Unofficially, the area was declared permanently off-limits as a military environmental exclusion zone. Modern satellite imagery still shows blurring in those coordinates. Artificial noise layers applied even after declassification. Remote sensing data reveals intermittent thermal blooms during winter months, though no human activity has been confirmed since the 1980s. Some scientists suggest residual heat from buried reactors. Others believe something else remains operational. Former Soviet communications officer Captain Yuri Basov, in a 1991 interview before his mysterious disappearance, claimed that the ghost stations were not only jammers, they were receivers. They were listening, he said, but not for NATO. They were waiting for something to reply. He described shifts when the static patterns would change rhythm, as though echoing a distant signal from beneath the permafrost. It wasn't random, he insisted. We called it the echo. Basov's testimony was dismissed as Cold War paranoia, yet documents recovered after his death corroborate part of his story. Among his effects were photocopies of declassified German field diagrams from 1943 titled Feldverstärker Nordgruppe, Field Amplifier, Northern Group. They depict subglacial antenna arrays identical in layout to the later Soviet ghost stations. Each is marked with runic symbols beside coordinates labeled Imandra, Lvozero, and Sala. In the margin, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Still transmitting." By 1999, the Russian Federation dismantled several Cold War installations across Kola, but none of the supposed ghost stations were listed. Satellite passes continue to detect minute but consistent radio pulses, barely audible, repeating every 19 seconds. Curiously, the same interval recorded by HMS Thane in 1945 during the disappearance of Operation Solaris. Whether coincidence or design, the rhythm connects two eras, the dying war and the frozen peace that followed. To this day, Russian environmental agencies deny access to the coordinates, citing unstable geological conditions. Yet local hunters whisper about nights when the snow glows faintly blue, when compasses twist, and when the air hums like distant machinery buried deep below. Whatever the ghost stations were, Soviet experiments, Nazi relics, or something in between, they stand as monuments to a silence that technology cannot fully erase. The North still hides its secrets beneath the ice. Every winter, when storms sweep over Lake Imandra and the aurora floods the sky, radio operators across the Arctic occasionally report a pulse faintly threading through the static. Steady, mechanical, 19 seconds apart, like the last heartbeat of something long dead, still refusing to fade. Chapter 5. Operation Harvest, the files that never existed. In the shattered ruins of Europe, as surrender papers were signed and flags exchanged, a new war began, not with guns or bombers, but with briefcases, shipping manifests, and forged railway orders. Between April and September of 1946, under the guise of reconstruction and resource recovery, a covert Anglo-American operation known as Operation Harvest swept across occupied Germany and Austria. Its official purpose was to collect remaining Axis research for Allied evaluation. Its real mission, buried under multiple intelligence layers, was to seize anything of technological, chemical, or atomic value before the Soviets could reach it. The operation's existence was denied by every participating government. For over 50 years, the earliest trace of Harvest appears in an inter-office memorandum from Major General Leslie R. Groves, commander of the Manhattan Engineer District, dated March 8, 1946. It references special consignments awaiting neutral, routing through Innsbruck, and a directive to British counterpart, Sir Stuart Menzies of MI6, ensure all materials transferred to the Trieste corridor are reclassified under Omega-level clearance. The letter is countersigned by both men and stamped with an annotation later redacted in British archives. Shared custody, indefinite containment. By mid-April, military railway records show 34 sealed freight cars departing Innsbruck under US supervision, marked engineering supplies. None reached Trieste. Soviet intelligence later reported similar trains moving along parallel routes through the Tyrol Alps, but those too vanished without trace. The convoys, it seemed, had evaporated into Europe's broken landscape. Years later, villagers from the Brenner Pass recounted rumors of military trucks unloading at night into abandoned mines near Matre am Brenner, guarded by American MPs wearing insignia without unit numbers. When British historian Dr. Colin Dyer gained limited access to post-war logistics files in 1983, he uncovered a single surviving document titled Harvest Inventory, Category Omega. The inventory listed 42 crates of high-value scientific components, 6 containers marked sealed biologicals, and one entry reading device fragments, source, Peenemünde, not to be reassembled. The document was stamped with a faded Manhattan District insignia. Despite being dated a full year after the project's official closure, Dyer's request to photograph the record was denied. 2 weeks later, the file itself was missing from the archive. Meanwhile, fragments of Operation Harvest surfaced unexpectedly in corporate patent registries. In 1951, Bell Aircraft filed a design for a turbine compression alloy nearly identical to metallurgical samples recovered from German laboratories. A year later, General Electric patented a radiation-resistant composite that matched research conducted under Nazi physicist Dr. Kurt Diebner, who officially died in Allied custody in 1945. Yet, a payroll entry from a US contractor in 1948 lists a D. Kurt receiving consultancy fees for special energy programs. The line item is immediately followed by Harvest, allocation. Declassified British Treasury accounts confirm that a substantial sum, 2.4 million in gold-backed bonds, was withdrawn under emergency authorization that same year. The funds were never accounted for. Analysts later determined that the money had been converted into untraceable bearer certificates, transferred to a Swiss bank registered to a shell company named Helios Consolidated GmbH, formed in 1946. The firm's founders remain unidentified, but among its board members was a former OSS logistics officer, Captain William R. Langford, who disappeared from public record in 1949. By the early 1950s, Operation Harvest had transformed from a recovery mission into a quiet foundation for Western black budget programs. One internal Pentagon memorandum from 1953 describes technical integration of acquired Axis material into ongoing propulsion and radiological studies. That same year, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission inaugurated the Nevada Test Sites Area 12, publicly for safety trials, privately for foreign artifact testing. A cross-reference index labeled those objects as Germanic Series, Harvest Origin. Documents unearthed in 2004 from the British National Archives suggest the United Kingdom maintained parallel facilities. A report by the Admiralty Research Laboratory in Teddington details experiments with high thermal composite lenses, supposedly derived from continental material, 1946 acquisition. Each page ends with a small printed footer. Property of Harvest Division, do not duplicate. By 1956, the Cold War had turned hot in every theater except the battlefield. Both sides were stockpiling knowledge as much as weapons. That same year, the CIA's Directorate of Science issued a termination review for Operation Harvest. Its summary concluded Primary objective achieved, containment protocols in place, further distribution unauthorized without Joint Chiefs approval. The rest of the report, 67 pages, was redacted. A handwritten addendum in the margin of the surviving page reads, "Field units report loss of Trieste caches, possibility of Omega crates recovered by unauthorized actors." Those actors were never identified, but intelligence analysts suspected Soviet retrieval teams operating out of Czechoslovakia had recovered at least one missing convoy. In 1961, an internal KGB communication referenced American shipments containing incomplete uranium matrix found near the Italian border. The fragments were catalogued and sealed in the Mayak facility under designation Foreign Sample 47. Curiously, Western intelligence already had a record of Sample 47. It was supposedly under US custody at Oak Ridge. 2 samples, identical composition, on opposite sides of the Iron Curtain. The deeper investigators dug, the more the operation dissolved into shadows. In 1970, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence briefly opened a classified inquiry into untraceable wartime materials under Anglo-American control. Witnesses included former logistics officers, metallurgists, and a single surviving driver from the Innsbruck convoys. The hearings were abruptly sealed, citing national security. Internal Senate memos later surfaced under the label Harvest Corollary. One line reads, "Recovered items, not weapons per se. Function remains undetermined. Material emits low-level radiation, but resists standard analysis." Another, witness reports psychological effects during transport, auditory hallucinations, metallic aftertaste, sense of magnetism in air. After that, the paper trail goes silent. Researchers continued to stumble upon the name in unexpected places. A NASA contract ledger from 1967 mentions Harvest Integrated Alloy Studies. A Department of Energy index from 1981 lists Harvest Sites 12A-12C under environmental monitoring exemptions. Each entry references locations later confirmed to be within restricted Nevada testing zones. None of these were open to civilian investigators. The most unsettling evidence came from a 1998 report leaked from Los Alamos National Laboratory. The document, titled Historical Origin, Analysis, Material Z147, describes an alloy sample retrieved from a sealed container stored since 1946. Chemical tests indicated isotopic ratios inconsistent with any known Earth-sourced element refinement of the era. The final paragraph before redaction states, "The Harvest sample remains a metallurgical impossibility given contemporary understanding. Recommend continued containment." By 2001, Operation Harvest had become a rumor, a conspiracy dismissed by mainstream historians as Cold War myth-making. But one clue remained. An anonymous letter sent to the British National Archives in 2009, postmarked from Trieste, Italy. Inside was a single sheet of faded US Army stationery bearing the heading Omega Manifest. Beneath it were only 5 words, typed unevenly on an old Remington typewriter. The convoys were never lost. No one ever identified the sender. Today, no official record of Operation Harvest exists in any public archive, yet its fingerprints can be found everywhere, in unexplained budget transfers, in overlapping patents decades ahead of their time, in silent exclusion zones across Central Europe where ground-penetrating radar finds metal too deep and too cold to recover. Historians who study it describe the operation as a hinge of history, the moment where the war's spoils turned into the century's secrets. Somewhere beneath alpine stone or Nevada sand, those missing convoys still rest, sealed under false names, their cargoes humming faintly with the energy of a vanished age. And if the fragments of truth found in declassified margins are to be believed, the legacy of Harvest did not end. It simply changed hands. The truth about the Second World War has always lived in the gaps, those redacted lines, sealed vaults, and names too dangerous to pronounce. From the Barents Sea to the Kola Peninsula, from Tempelhof's buried chambers to the missing convoys of Operation Harvest, each discovery leads deeper into a maze where history and silence are one and the same. Files vanish, witnesses die quietly, coordinates blur from maps. Perhaps the war never truly ended. Perhaps it only shifted underground into archives that will never be opened. And somewhere, even now, the sealed boxes are waiting.